Shelly from Fruci University. We're going to be talking about fatigue, MS, and going into a bit more detail on that. But before we go into that, Shelly, if you could just kind of introduce yourself and say a bit more about you, really.
I'm Dr. Shelly Coe. I'm a senior lecturer at Brookes University, but I do, as part of my role, quite a bit of research. So my background is nutrition, and that's how I met Matt through that route. So I look at sort of neurological and autoimmune conditions where fatigue is a main symptom, and I look to see how lifestyle interventions such as, say, diet, physical activity, can help to improve fatigue and all of the associated sort of symptoms around that.
Cool. Yeah, so before we go into like fatigue in a bit more detail, what is MS? Just so we can, because I know your kind of research was around that.
Yeah. So two of my main conditions that I research into are Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis. So multiple sclerosis is a condition that can come on quite young. So we do have participants that get it sort of from the age of 18. So it can be quite tragic in that sense. And it is quite debilitating. So it is a neurodegenerative disease, and basically your neurons stop working as efficiently, which can lead to a range of symptoms such as pain, basically quite sort of symptoms throughout the entire body. So it can be quite debilitating, and again, without getting into fatigue too much, that can be one of the main symptoms of MS.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's helpful, and like the reason. Although, like, that's obviously important to distinguish, I think going into fatigue and how I want to relate this to kind of not just away from MS, but also to what, like, I guess everyday people can take from it as well, who maybe have conditions where fatigue is maybe a symptom. But I guess before we go into that, what is the difference between, say, I'm feeling tired today versus fatigue? Because, that can be...
Yeah, and sometimes they do overlap. So it could just be, that you are tired. But the difference with fatigue and tiredness, I think, in a very sort of simple way, but also kind of explains it really well, is that fatigue isn't cured by a good night's sleep. So you can have a good night's sleep where you feel that you've got your sort of 8 hours or whatever you determine for yourself as a good night's sleep, but actually the fatigue does not go away. So you still feel that kind of tiredness even though you have had a good night's sleep.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So with regards to fatigue, like are there any recommendations at the moment? Like what is out there right now that what you would suggest, if you like, or what the research shows?
I think so many people can experience fatigue, so it doesn't have to be just what we consider a fatiguing condition such as MS or fibromyalgia. So, even somebody who would consider themselves in good health can have periods of fatigue. So the research shows that at the moment there's no real strong treatment for fatigue. So drug approaches are not very successful for fatigue. Okay. Part of the reason for this is that fatigue is very difficult to give a definition of, what is fatigue. So the underlying mechanisms behind fatigue are so complex that it's really difficult to find a treatment to treat it or, essentially cure it. So at the moment, the best types of interventions for fatigue are things like lifestyle interventions, so things like diet, activity, cognitive behavioral therapy. So those are sort of the most promising at the moment treatments for fatigue.
Okay, so I know that's almost like I guess it's good to hear in some aspect that there's not necessarily a drug, but and I'm not saying they don't help, but with regards to the lifestyle stuff, obviously when someone's in a state where they're fatigued, the last thing, even though they maybe know they need to do something, it's almost the last thing that they want to do. How does research intertwine with the practicality of that?
Yeah. Yeah, so it is quite difficult because I think even if you are the most motivated person in the world, sometimes you find it hard to get out of bed on a cold day and go to the gym and do all the things that you should be doing. So I think when you have a condition or when you have something like fatigue that can be quite impactful on your life, again, it just makes it a little bit harder to do those things that you know you should be doing. So getting up, making a healthy, breakfast, having a healthy diet throughout the day, doing your physical activity, doing all the things that essentially will help that fatigue. So it is, as I mentioned to you, quite a vicious circle, because actually when you're fatigued, you do tend to do less and eat more of the stuff that you shouldn't be eating, and then that in turn makes you more fatigued. So it's kind of about breaking that cycle, and that's really difficult to do, as I say, even for somebody who experience very, very minor fatigue.
Yeah, and that, something I always say to the ladies I work with is like knowing that something is better than all or nothing, and quite often when someone gets that in their head, they start to know that, yeah, I'm not going to attend a session which is half an hour long, but I can do one of these 5-minute workouts, go for a walk, rather than it being this I'm either on or I'm off kind of thing. And I know this is kind of going a bit further away from fatigue in some aspect, but sometimes it's a state that we kind of are in that dictates our next decision. And then that just like good momentum, bad momentum can happen, because that can lead to then screw it, slippers on, wine out, then I eat, then I have poor sleep, and then etc. Tomorrow I'm more ratty with loved ones, etc. But is there what's the causes of it? Like, does anyone know, like, is there typical causes of fatigue? Like, is there anything that's like nailed on with that, or?
The problem with fatigue, and especially being a researcher who focuses on fatigue, is that actually we don't understand the underlying mechanism. So there has been theories around sort of things like the feel-good hormones that we experience, so dopamine, serotonin, whether that impacts on fatigue, or whether fatigue impacts on sort of those hormones, which then result in depression, etc. So the short answer for that is no, but the more we do into fatigue, the more research, the more we're learning. And actually, it might be that different conditions experience fatigue for different reasons. So it could be sort of just at the brain level, where the fatigue kind of starts and continues, or it could be the whole body level. So it's a very, very complex symptom or underlying sort of pathology that we don't really understand yet.
So do they look at like dopamine and serotonin levels in people with fatigue and find a difference or not?
Well, yes, but then also the problem is that a lot of conditions where fatigue is a main symptom, so are things like anxiety and depression. So it is, do they go together, or is it two separate conditions that just happen to be present in the same condition? So there has been research looking into that, and actually normally when you have a fatiguing condition, there is more, levels of depression and etc. So all those sort of interlinked symptoms.
Yeah, so you don't know if it's the dopamine or the serotonin or the fatigue, which way around. And then I guess that makes it hard to treat, right? So what are like, are there any like treatment studies that, I know you obviously did one in chocolate. I was just bring that up. Yeah. So like, what are the, because if you see it from someone in that point of view who does have fatigue, I guess, and there's no side effects in trying it, why not? So what is there anything out there that you, like, the research backs up, and obviously your own research as well?
Yeah, so going back to what you were saying about, even doing something little, even if you don't do the whole, the kind of the whole approach to fatigue, even every little step helps. So the joy with the fatigue project with the cocoa, so what we did was we looked at people with MS who had been recently diagnosed, so kind of 10 years post-diagnosis, no more than that. So these were people of sort of mostly working age who had families and careers, and, you know, fatigue was actually impacting on their lifestyle and their productivity and, you know, everything. So the science behind cocoa, so we're talking about not like dairy milk, but dark cocoa, so sort of pure, that bitter cocoa. So the mechanisms behind that were really strong scientifically. So it contains compounds called flavonoids, which, again, long story short, basically can impact on fatigue, mood, so all those symptoms that are kind of associated with fatigue. So we looked at a 6-week intervention. So we gave people cocoa every morning for 6 weeks. And we looked at fatigue before and after. So we took quite a few different measures of fatigue so that we kind of had a, you know, more than just one rating of fatigue. And what we found was, even though it was a small study, that there was a trend for fatigue to improve overall in the dark cocoa group, but that also we looked at things like, was this feasible? Did people want to include this in their daily lives? You know, were they receptive to this? Because the thing about research is that you can see an effect and you can see a positive effect, but actually if people don't want to you know, take the cocoa or implement that into their lifestyle, then there's no point. So overall the kind of results were positive from that, and it seems very simple, but actually if you incorporated a bit of dark cocoa into your routine as you have it now, you know, again, just taking that small step, actually it could make some improvement. So it's really cost effective, it's cheap, it's easy to do, and actually it shows that you don't have to always change your whole lifestyle in order to see little improvements, even though obviously a healthy lifestyle is the key, but actually just adding simple things like this. So I think that there was a lot of positivity around the study for those reasons, because we weren't changing drastically people's lives, we were just implementing something into people's lives who were busy, who had, you know, too much to do and just had families, so they couldn't change their whole diet. And it was quite interesting to see those results.
Yeah, that's good. And that's good to hear, because actually change is hard and that puts people off doing anything. And that's why I've actually written a book recently about a habit shift. So it's basically instead of like, you know, reading loads of theory, nodding your head and going, yeah, that makes sense. It's essentially, this is a bit of theory behind it. Go and do this. Here's a checklist of every time you do it. And it's really simple things. Like it could be as simple as keeping a glass of water 6 within arm's reach. Like really simple things like that you can add into your day. But yeah, it might not make a difference today, but do that for another day, a week, a month, and year. And it's not exactly something that you have to start on Monday. You don't have to start on Monday keeping a glass of water there, or even the chocolate. So with the cocoa, was that like a specific type? Was it like, does it have to be organic or like anything like that? Or was it just like, because obviously that's, is it any type or is it just 100% cocoa?
No, so that's what we got after the study was published and all the media around it. We had lots of people coming in saying, what type of cocoa does it? It can be any type of cocoa. The darker the better. So I would say anything over sort of 75% would work. We did give it in a drink form, just because, again, in people with MS, there is a symptom of sort of bladder loss of bladder control sometimes. So a lot of people restrict their fluid intake, which is not good ultimately on fatigue and other symptoms. So we did a drink form, but it can be a solid form, it can be any form. So, you know, it again, it just kind of shows that it doesn't have to be expensive, it doesn't have to be organic, it can be just any kind of dark cocoa.
Okay, so you often see in, like, you know, Holland and Barrett, shops like that, cacao and cocoa. Cacao is like 3 times the price as the cocoa. Does that matter?
Not really. So they are slightly different. You know, cacao probably is a bit more of a pure form of that, so that's probably why it's expensive, because you know, it is more of a raw kind of unprocessed. But in terms of, you know, everyday helping fatigue, then dark cocoa is fine.
So in terms of like the flavonoids that you hypothesize, I guess, they're pretty much the same, or?
Yeah. I mean, different quantities, but there, with flavonoid research, there is an element of, is there a threshold? Actually, is more always
Yeah.
better type thing. So we saw results, as I say, without without too high of a dose. So actually, it doesn't probably have to be an extreme expensive dose of flavonoids.
Okay, cool. And then how much? Because obviously we haven't said that. That's quite important. Dark chocolate for breakfast. Yeah. How much would you say to someone? So on the study, like how much did you use? Because I guess that was practical, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's quite difficult. It's difficult to translate because we did use a drink and sort of powder.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to, because every cocoa will have slightly different ingredients and
Yeah.
slightly different. But another study, that a smaller study that was done in chronic fatigue syndrome, not by us, but which helped to feed into our study and how we kind of got the background for ours. They actually just used a small bit of dark cocoa once a day, so sort of a couple of squares of dark cocoa. So it doesn't take much, actually. It can be quite a small amount.
Okay. And is there anything, because obviously cocoa contains caffeine. Is there any element that the caffeine is not helping? Like,
Yeah. So what we did in the MS study is we made, so one group had the dark cocoa and one group had what we called a placebo cocoa, which didn't have any flavonoids in.
okay.
So in both cocos, we matched them for caffeine and something called theobromine, because both caffeine and theobromine have also been shown to improve fatigue. So we wanted to see, actually, was it the flavonoids, not the caffeine and not the theobromine? So we went about it that way.
Okay,
cool.
That's
good.
good.
Yeah.
So
Flavonoids,
what
what
are
are
they?
they?
'Cause most people will be going like,
how are they?
Yeah. So flavonoids come under, so people have probably heard of something called antioxidants, and people probably know that antioxidants are good for them. They're found in fruits, they're found in vegetables, but they're also found in things like red wine, dark chocolate. Now, antioxidants, another kind of term, now these are slightly different, but are polyphenols. So antioxidant polyphenols are sometimes used interchangeably, and within polyphenols, then that's where flavonoids fall under. So basically what they are they're compounds found in foods that go back to sort of ancient medicine times, but haven't really gained a lot of credibility until kind of the last 20 years. Because even though we don't have a recommended amount of polyphenols or flavonoids that we need every day in order to, say, stay alive, actually what they're finding now is that if you have a diet that doesn't have flavonoids, polyphenols, antioxidants in, you are more likely to get these sort of aging conditions and, I guess, ultimately, die earlier. So actually, they're now being kind of considered the aging sort of compounds. So if you want to live healthier for longer, then you need a diet rich in these sort of antioxidants, flavonoids.
Okay. And then what's good sources of that? Fruit.
So fruits, so anything colourful. So polyphenols, flavonoids, they impart some of the colour. So sort of in berries, things like that, vegetables. They are also found in things like oats and other kind of cereal products that you wouldn't necessarily think contained these. You can get supplements and stuff like that with these, but actually you can obtain antioxidants and polyphenols from your diet, and actually, and you'd probably agree, this is the better way to get those healthy nutrients through sort of just a balanced diet.
Yeah, and I think it's almost another reason to take them, because sometimes, if you just hear, some things come so cliche, don't they? Like, drink more water, eat more fruit and vegetables. It's so cliche that it almost just goes over your head and you just go, yeah, I know I need to do that. But when you hear something, I know this sounds a bit like faddy, but like when you hear something a bit new and a bit like, polyphenols, aging, flavanol, whether that helps 1% or 10%, the fact that it gives a bit more credibility behind it and there's some research backed into it might just be the difference between me going, actually, you know what, I will have that because that has jolted something. There's more of a benefit of doing it than just eating fruit and vegetables. Does that make sense? Because I think that there are things that go through people's minds, right? When you when you make a choice, like, oh, just fruit and veg. I don't like veg, but I want to feel like I have more energy. I want to, go down that route as well.
Well, this is the thing, because I mean, even as a nutritionist myself, I really struggle to eat fruit. So I had to look for other sources of sort of, and that's the fun thing about things like polyphenols, is that actually it's not just the fruits and the vegetables; they are found in other things. So actually, black English tea is a very rich source of polyphenols, and most of the UK drinks that. So, you can get it from other sources that that aren't just your fruits and vegetables. They can be found in a variety of foods.
So what other foods would they be? So tea, anything else?
So tea, as I said, a lot of sort of cereal products. So that would be oats, sort of millets, brown sort of grains. So those type of, again, those healthy foods that contain fiber as well. You can find them in tea. They're very rich in green tea as well. So you might have heard that, green tea is good for you. And most of the reason for that is because of those polyphenols. I think that's, and as I say, dark chocolate is a very good source of it as well.
So is there any drawback in polyphenols? Like, do they have any negative effects, like high doses or in certain people?
So as far as I'm aware, there haven't been any toxicity sort of effects of too many polyphenols. I think it's quite difficult to consume too many polyphenols in the diet. Just because of the types of foods they're in, you can only eat so many sort of strawberries before, you start to have symptoms of laxative effects and everything else. So actually the foods that they're in, you tend not to be able to overdose on those as much as you would say, foods without them in. So as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any negative toxicity doses. And actually some of the countries that have more polyphenols in their general diet tend to be healthier. So whether that's a cause or whether that's a coincidence, there is an association there.
Okay. So there's no like anti-nutrient effect of them or anything like that either.
No, so basically certain polyphenols and classes of polyphenols can bind to certain sort of minerals in your diet. So if you consume it with other foods that contain some minerals, then they can bind to them and stop you absorbing them. So that's probably one of they used to be termed anti-nutrients for this reason before all of the positive effects of them. I think the general kind of rule is too much of anything is not good either. So it's all about sort of that healthy balance.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And is there anything else with regards to fatigue at the moment that you would kind of think of as a practical thing that someone can do?
Yeah. So in terms of improving fatigue, you mean?
Yeah.
So it's really difficult, I think, fatigue, because I see so many different conditions and so many different people who suffer from fatigue or have fatigue as a symptom, and because it is invisible, I think sometimes it can be quite frustrating because employers don't see any physical signs, family don't see it. You want to do something but you can't physically do it even though you're not showing any physical symptoms. So it can be quite difficult mentally as well. So I guess my overall, considering the research that I've done so far, is that actually making those small changes to your diet so that you are consuming those foods that are rich in polyphenols or that are not so we have this kind of Western diet now in the UK where a lot of the foods are high in saturated fat. We get takeouts a lot, very high in salt. Those are the types of foods that, even though they are nice to consume, should be consumed on occasion, because they are the ones that are also going to make you very fatigued. In terms of physical activity, everybody's different in that sense. So you have to do sort of what feels right for you. But sometimes people don't do physical activity because they are worried about fatigue. But actually, results have shown that long term, doing bits of physical activity can ultimately help with fatigue. So, it is hard sometimes to kind of do that when you feel bad afterwards. Again, with the sleep situation, ultimately, sleep will help any symptoms you suffer from, including fatigue, but actually people who have fatigue really do struggle with sleep. So even though they feel tired and they want to sleep, they can't. So, it is I think every individual is different, but taking those small steps to help your fatigue and what works best for you, I think is the key.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, like I said before, with sleep, like a lot of the ladies I work with as well will often say, like, we'll talk about all these food, nutrition, and types of exercise, but then when we get to sleep, it's almost a like don't bring it up area kind of thing. And I think when you think about way back when, I find it interesting as a hypothesis. Like, I wonder if anyone had sleep, if there was sleep issues way back when, and over years and years of maybe living off, due to work, due to families, and sleeping like 4 or 5 hours, and we kind of get used to it. What changes this has in the body, in terms of, like you said, about MS and etc. Like, I always wonder where sleep comes into that,
given it how important we know it is.
Yeah, well, definitely sleep, in terms of mental health and sort of brain function is very important. I'm coming back.
You just went then. Yeah, back on. Yeah.
It's all right, I didn't say anything too important. So, adequate sleep is very important for the brain, and without sleep, your brain can't kind of process everything you've done in the day, and people who sleep less can be at risk of sort of Alzheimer's and that type of thing, because you need sleep for your brain to kind of revive itself overnight. So it is a problem, and it is a frustrating problem, for those who can't sleep, and even to the extent where, people with MS who have bladder problems, the reason they don't sleep well is because they have to get up 5 times a night to go to the toilet, so there's some aspects of sleep and fatigue that you can't overcome, but that's why it's very individualized, in that, it is hard. It is hard, especially if you have a family that has to be priority and the rest of it. But yeah, it is a bit of a taboo subject, and I think research is looking more into sleep, but it's still kind of a blurry area like fatigue is.
Yeah, because I guess then you could look at small things you can do, like for example, with technology late at night, actually relaxing, like not checking your emails till like right to bed, having a bath before bed, like reading, and actually at the same time not putting loads of pressure on yourself to get to sleep, because sometimes I think that's the issue, right? Like when you're sat there going go to sleep, like your brain is now wired because you're telling it to be wired and feeding it. Like, yeah, I did hear something from, I can't remember who said it, but anyway, there was a talk, and he said the one thing he recommends if you can't sleep is because most people get up and they have a cup of tea, and where they associate tea with that being quite pleasurable, you're associating getting up in the night with something pleasurable, so it teaches your body to do it more. So he says do something that you hate doing, like cleaning the oven. So you clean the oven and you hate doing it. At worst, you've got a job done that you needed to be done that you kept putting off. At best, you go, sod this, I'm going to go upstairs and go back to bed.
But it is really sometimes that simple, like those little tricks that will help. I think that's, you can't kind of estimate how much that can work. Yeah,
because I'll be honest, like when our first baby was born, I used to always be up in the night, and I actually got into the habit of making poached egg on toast at like 2 a.m. And then it was almost when they slept through, I was almost going, oh, they're not awake, I can't have my poached eggs on toast, unless it's a bit weird now if I get up and have poached eggs on toast. Yeah, so yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, cool. So I think anything else at all that you want to kind of add to that?
No, I think it's great what you do, Matt, because I think there are a lot of people who, do have busy lives, or just think that actually they just need to get over, what they're feeling and get on with it. They have too much to do. But, there are so many people that do struggle with various symptoms, including fatigue, that, just a little bit of support, or just hearing that somebody else is doing that, or just hearing the story like you just said about, doing something you hate when you wake up so that you go back to sleep. But I think hearing all of this together, as well as what the research is showing, can really help people to kind of get on their track. So everybody's going to be different in terms of what they do and what they're happy to change in their lives. So I think I come from a very balanced lifestyle approach, whereas even as a nutritionist, I don't expect people to eat fruits and vegetables and drink water and run all day long. Like, I enjoy a glass of wine on a weekend, and so I think it is about balance. And even if you do fall off your kind of plan a little bit, not to beat yourself up about that, because why make it worse on yourself? So I think it's really good what you're doing, and thank you for letting me come on and talk.
No, thank you. It's great because it just reiterates the message I give about it being you versus you. If you fall off the wagon, half the time it's normally because our expectations of ourselves are just through the roof anyway. And actually, that's the issue. Like, where we are now wasn't really actual. It was just ideal. We're good at very, very good at sugarcoating, the visualization of what we should be doing. Whereas, when we accept where we are now, maybe you're working 10 hours a day, you're commuting an hour, then you've got kids, then you've got family stuff, work stuff at home. Like, when you actually think, right, what's doable? And that's why, I guess the cocoa is something that someone can just try immediately. Like, it could be that someone goes home from this and they have cocoa in the morning, they clean their oven at night if they struggle with sleeping, and they have a glass of water always by their side all day. That's 3 things that anyone could do without pretty much any prep.
Exactly.
And
it can be that simple. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. That's really helpful.
No,
Brilliant.
great.
Thanks a lot, Shelly.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye.
So that was the interview with Dr. Shelly Coe on fatigue, MS, and polyphenols chocolate. So if you do have any other questions on that or anything at all, message me and I can send them over to Shelly if you do have any other questions on that. Just to let you know, our November 4-week Kickstart program is opening up soon. But if you do want details on that now, it's in Devizes, Marlborough, Burbage, for ladies over 40. Do send me over a message and I can get you the details in advance for that. Any other questions, just let me know and speak soon.